Hey y'all, and welcome to Painting a Portrait in Oil. So I do have this video in, I think I'm at 3x speed here. So I'm going to take you through all of the different steps that I used and kind of explain some of the rationale behind why I made the decisions that I did. So starting off, I am using a pretty thin wash of burnt umber paint mixed with non-toxic thinner. I'm also using a pretty wide brush, and it's a very soft brush. It's not stiff at all. I'm using it for this part because I want to keep it super loose, and my only objective right now is to kind of carve in the silhouette of the shape. Now, one of the things I do want to point out is when I'm doing this, I'm not concentrating on the shape of the face, the shape of the body. I'm actually concentrating on the negative space. So what I was doing was trying to paint the shapes of all of the black around my model versus painting the model herself. Once I have that in, then of course I do start to go in and concentrate on some of those shadows. And as you can see, I'm not being exact here at all. This is just giving me kind of a rough idea of where I want everything to be. Now, let's talk about the reference photo for a second. This is a reference photo that I pulled off of Pinterest, and it's one, I picked it because I thought that the lighting was really awesome, and I thought it was an intriguing photo. It's actually of an actress. I'll put all of the details in the link to the photo below. But I don't own this photo. I don't own the rights to it. This is purely for entertainment and educational purposes. I just thought it would be a fun study to do. So once I get my very general layout of where my person's going to be in relation to the canvas, then I start to go in. I use a little bit of a thicker brush, a smaller brush, and I use a lot less thinner on my brush. So I'm going in with a thicker layer of paint. Now, one of the other reasons, speaking of reference photos, I like this one because it had really nice defined shadows under the neck, under the nose. I typically like a little more shadow under the eyebrow ridge, but nonetheless, I thought it was great. I think a lot of times the success of a painting boils down to the success of your reference photo. Also, since we're speaking of reference photos, I do want to say that I am not going for photorealism here. I love to paint with a super organic process, meaning I like to let the painting unfold. I could sit here and do a very detailed sketch ahead of time or use a projector to trace it out, but for me, that loses a lot of fun. So what I just showed here was my palette. I am using alizarin permanent, cobalt blue, yellow brown, and I've also started to use a bit of transparent vermilion. And what I'm doing is I'm just going in and really roughing in with this thick brush, just roughing in the general placement of colors. I'm not being too exact. And as you'll notice on the left-hand side, I am using, so the app that I'm using is called Pixelmator. And why I love it is because it has a color picker tool. So I can just hover over any part of the photo like I am right here and isolate the color. And that lets me get a much clearer understanding of what the different shades are. So if you see that nose, when I use the color picker tool on that nose, it's so much more warm and pink and red than it at least appears to me by eye. So yeah, I'm just going in and you'll see like here, those aren't lips that I just painted. Those are just two blocks of colors that happen to be next to each other. And when next to each other, they provide each other with context and your brain reads them as lips. But that's the same. I didn't paint a nose. I just put a block of color there. And that's kind of my whole process for this beginning stage. So as we get into adding more color onto the face and start working on the smaller areas, one of the things you might run into is getting gray skin tones. This is something that I hear a lot about. And the reason why a lot of people, or at least I, struggle with gray skin tones is because a lot of times when you are going from a highlight or a lighter part of the face to a shadow, what you are accidentally doing is creating a tone. And what a tone means is it's your pure color mixed with gray. Whereas, a tint and a shade is generally what you're wanting to look for. However, my burnt umber in this situation is kind of working like a black there. And when I mix that into any paint that has white, I get that gray color. And the way that I personally combat it is I use a lot of transparent colors. And you'll notice that I often in my paintings, I will tackle the value and the color in two separate passes. So right here, I'm just really trying to focus on finding the form of the face. And a lot of times that means me just adding white into the area. However, if that is a darker area that already has burnt umber in it, then I'm going to create a gray. And so what I'll need to do in a later pass is just go back over that area with a little transparent vermilion mixed with a little yellow brown, and it brings that area right back to life. Now, at this point, I am not positive about the placements of my features. I'm probably only about 40 or 50% sure that I have everything in the right place. Like for sure, I know my lips are in the wrong place. It looks like I'm addressing that right now. My nose is probably a little too high. But again, I don't like to get bogged down with that stuff, and we're not going for photorealism here. We'll probably get close. I like to capture likeness, but it's more about the emotion, the movement, the feeling that we can capture. Unless I'm working on a commission, which I don't really do, or you're painting a picture of someone really well known, then, don't get bogged down with the idea of capturing exact likeness. Now, the brush that I'm using here, I do want to point out it is a super stiff brush, and I'm painting on oil paper. Now, if you've never used oil paper before, it is a dream to work with. The blending that it lets you do, especially with a nice stiff brush like this, it's just amazing. And it lets you push and pull colors really nicely. Now, some of you may be wondering why I went in with that wash of dark umber in the beginning if I'm just going to be covering it all up anyways. And that beginning part serves a few different purposes. So first, like I mentioned, I don't go in with like a formal sketch. So that beginning kind of part in that burnt umber serves as my placeholder sketch. It lets me know where I'm going to put all those different features. The other thing that it does is it provides a nice middle ground for me to work on, so that I can judge all of my colors a lot easier. It's a lot harder when you're painting directly onto white background to actually be able to judge your colors. Now, I do want to point out this is the first time in the whole process that I've zoomed in on her face. So now I've switched to I'm still working with my bigger brush, but soon I'll switch to my smaller brush. But this is really the first time in the whole process where I am actually going to start thinking about the gravity of the shapes, the weight of the shapes, the angles of all of my lines and shapes. And now we're going to start refining. And when I say gravity, the gravity of the shapes is something that I think about all the time. And in my head, I literally picture a marble or a balloon. And I think to myself, so if I'm looking at the bottom of her nose and I say, if I dropped a marble down her nose, where is that marble going to flow the fastest? Where is it going to slow down? Where is it going to end? Where's the lowest point on that? And the same with a balloon. So like if we look at her eyebrow arch, I would say to myself, okay, if I put a balloon at the top of her eyebrow or at the, beginning of her eyebrow, where would that balloon float to? Where would its endpoint be? And so that's when I say the gravity of the shapes, that's what I mean. It's just like a concrete way that I can imagine it in my head. Now, it may be hard to see because you guys can't see my palette in this view, but I am not loading my brush up with a lot of paint. I'm actually letting that underneath, that burnt umber ground, do a lot of the work for me. There's really, I'm only picking up a tiny bit of paint every time I go into any of these areas. One of the things that I want to point out is that anytime I go into any of the shadowed areas, I am oversaturating my brush. Why? Well, it goes back to the whole tint, tone, shade thing, because when I'm mixing into that burnt umber with any of my lighter colors, I end up graying it out. So I need to oversaturate it with usually my warm colors. When you look at the transitions between a highlight and a shadow, quite often you'll find a lot of warmth. Look at the bottom of her jaw, where the chin to the jaw goes. You can see it almost looks like a line of red. Same with the edge of her nose, into the highlights there. Really, most of those places you're gonna find a little bit of warmth. So I tend to oversaturate my brush when I'm working into those areas to avoid graying it out. At this point, I'm also really trying to pay a lot of attention to the form, making sure that it's looking 3D. Making sure that around all the edges, even if it's a highlighted edge, it's still getting darker, right? Because the form is moving, the skin is moving around that form, and you're going to have a slight amount of darkening there. Oh, before I forget, one other reason why I like to start on with that burnt umber wash at the beginning is because I'm working on oil paper. It's a joy to work with, but it soaks up paint so much. So if you're used to working on canvas, or wood, or a material like that, it's quite the difference working on oil paper. So if I can at least kind of get that background saturated with some oil, then when I go in to do the actual painting, it just provides a much more pleasant and smoother experience. Now, one of the things that I hear from a lot of beginners, and what I had been told too, was that don't ever blend on your canvas. And you'll notice here I'm doing a lot of blending on the canvas. Your paintbrush, your paint, they are tools. And don't be afraid to use your tools however you want. I just want to point out here also, if you could see my palette, I know I only flashed it there for a second, but it's still pretty put together. I'm really only grabbing a little bit of paint at each of these passes. But yeah, don't be afraid to blend in your colors as long as you know what causes dull colors. And people generally tell you not to blend on canvas because you'll get muddy skin tones. But as long as you know what causes the muddy skin tones, you know how to avoid it, and it becomes a non-issue for you. Speaking of palettes, as you can see, my palette was not very well organized, and not many things in my life are organized, so I figured why start with my palette. All right, at this point, we're getting into the hair. Hair is my least favorite thing to paint in the entire world. But we are following the same method that we did when we started on the face. I am just going in with a big brush and just blocking in colors. I'm not painting individual hairs. I'm just looking at where the general masses are and what direction they take. At this point, I start to get excited because we are starting to achieve likeness. It's not exact, but there's definitely a sense of likeness there. One of the things I was told, and I can't remember who told it to me or if I had read it somewhere, but it was something and it just stuck out to me. And that is that there are no lines on the human face. And once I heard that, it just completely changed the way that I looked at my paintings. It changed the way that I painted. There were so many areas, the lips, the eyes, the nose, where I was painting these lines, and really they're not lines. They are three-dimensional shapes with form. And so that's one thing that you'll notice in my work is I really try, and anytime I see any sort of lines, I go in and try and soften those up to get rid of them. 90% of the success, I'm just paraphrasing here, by the way. I'm just kind of spitballing if you can't tell. But like, I swear, 90% of the success of your painting will come down to how well you can observe your reference photo. That's it. How well can you observe the colors, the angles, the forms? When I was first starting out, I distinctly remember Googling how to paint photorealistically because I thought it was just like the coolest thing. And one of the first links that came up was a Yahoo Answers article. And it said in it was this long story about this kid who was in college and he asked his professor the same question. And the professor said to him, "Well, look at your painting. Does it look like your picture? If not, make it look like it." And it was like the least helpful advice in the entire world. But when I read it, it really did have such a huge impact on me. And it just made me realize that I wasn't really observing and looking at my paintings enough. I wasn't observing the reference photos. I wasn't really paying attention to them. And that's kind of my philosophy now. Does it look like it? Yes or no? And if not, fix it. Again, I realize it's stupid advice, but it's helped me. Gosh, we are 20 minutes into this. If you have made it this far, thank you and congrats. And I'm sorry you've had to hear me ramble this whole time, but I hope seeing my process was helpful. And yeah, hope you took something from it. As you can see, I'm going in here and just darkening up a lot of those shadow areas, just adding a little more sense of depth where it's needed. And yeah, I don't have a specific methodology like starting dark to light. I generally start with my midtones and work out from there. Now, here just comes the tedious part, where we just start to go in and really blend where needed. Start to focus on making sure all of our hues, all of our saturation, all of our, we're just making sure it looks like the reference photo, at least as much as we want it to. And I do want to point out that one of the things that I do is when I am adding in, whether it's a value change or a color change, I place the paint on my paintbrush. I dab it right into the middle of the area that I want it in, and then I blend out from there. We are nearing the end, and unfortunately, when I went back to all of my footage, I accidentally missed the very end where I finish off the ear. So it kind of ends abruptly coming up, but I think it still works. Hopefully you guys have gotten something from this. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to finish out her lips here and do a last few final changes. But if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And if you guys have any requests, things that you really want to know about, let me know. I hope you guys like it. Oh, also, you may be asking, where are her eyes? And yeah, I didn't paint them for this one. A lot of my paintings, I just don't paint eyes, or I don't paint both eyes. I love the undone feeling of it. So yeah, bye.